Yeah, it's pretty much in the title. I just thought it'd be fun to do a Shonen Jump tier list, so without wasting your time, let's get right into it. You can see the rankings on the left there. We're gonna work our way from bottom to top, and the criteria for this is basically any Shonen Jump series that has run in 2020. So that includes both started and ended. That way we include things like Demon Slayer and The Promised Neverland, but also get to touch on some newer series. Also, if you like this, we'll be doing more tier lists when this video goes up live over on my Twitch, so you can go join me there. But we're starting with the manga that I simply have not read enough to pass judgment on. That includes the likes of One Piece, which, while I have read up through Alabasta, that's only about 1/5 the way through the manga, so not exactly enough to judge the overall quality. Black Clover I have not started, so really can't say much there. Hunter x Hunter, despite me loving the anime, I have not touched the manga at all, so I should definitely fix that. I also struggled on whether to include it here at all, since it hasn't had a chapter in 2020, but it still technically is in Jump, so yeah, that's another reason why I'm putting it here. Haikyuu is an interesting case where I kind of unintentionally followed the last arc of the manga because I just saw people reacting to it on my Twitter timeline, but beyond that, I have not read any of it, so I will absolutely get to it eventually as I've been very much enjoying the anime, but manga-wise, I can't say anything. I wasn't too high on Samurai 8 to begin with, but I also haven't read more than a few chapters of it, but knowing it didn't go on for too long and has a concrete ending does make me more inclined to go back and give it a second chance. I can say almost the exact same thing for Mitama Security. It's a gag series, so it's entirely possible it's not my speed, but I should give it more than its first chapter before deciding that definitively. We Never Learn is a series where I've heard about the quote-unquote discourse that's going on surrounding its last couple arcs as it's dragging its feet towards the finish line, but it's not fair for me to rank it only based on that discussion I've heard around the community. Roboco is the last of the series that I haven't read. It's also the newest, so it doesn't have a ton of chapters out, but I do think it has enough to where you can kind of gauge more where it's going to go. Hence why series of a similar length that I have read all of will be on here, but these next few won't. You could call the too early to tell category a bit of a cop-out, but the longest of these new series, Phantom Seer, only has 5 chapters out at the time of recording this. I think you can judge the individual chapters quality-wise fine, but when it comes to ranking these series overall when their stories have barely begun, I don't know, part of it just doesn't make sense to me. But it's also for that reason that I would very much encourage you to check out these new series to see if they're up your alley. Those series again being Phantom Seer, My High School Family, and Our Blood Oath. Moving on to the lowest ranking of series I've finished, primarily because they got axed and therefore their story is, for better or worse, complete. Not that these series don't have redeeming qualities or could even be potentially good, but in most cases a lot of that potential is left on the table. We're gonna go in the order that they came out, and while it is tempting to put all of these series in F because they clearly failed to appeal to a large audience and therefore got axed, I don't want to be that cut and dry. So starting with Zip Man, yeah, I'm actually going to put it in D, mostly because I did enjoy the first couple chapters and was really on board with the premise. The mangaka previously worked as an assistant under Horikoshi, and you can really see that influence, be that in the designs or this 2-page spread from the first chapter. But the reason it lost interest for me in particular was it didn't focus as much on the sibling dynamic as I was expecting it would. Meanwhile, the plot just kept spinning its wheels, and I think by chapter 7 or 8 I was pretty meh on the series overall. But yeah, it's not going in the lowest tier because I genuinely did enjoy the introduction to this manga. However, I cannot say as kind things for these next two. Guardian of the Witch, honestly, I was never really on board with it. The first chapter is clunky, the evils as they're called never posed as much of a threat as the world building made me think they would. Oh, and on the note of world building, it's not the end all be all, but apparently this takes place in Great Britain, but you wouldn't know that because no character says it, and the only time you get any hint at it is when they show a map and it looks like, yeah, I guess that's Great Britain, but you know, it's nothing like Great Britain, so why? Also, the fights aren't terribly interesting, and the artwork's really nothing to write home about. And then it just sort of ends in a very inconclusive manner. But hey, and this goes for any series I'm talking about, I welcome your input, because maybe you noticed something I didn't. So, moving on to Bone Collection, it is going to join Guardian of the Witch in the F tier. Likewise, a series that I didn't have many positive things to say after the first chapter. Some of the world building was kind of interesting, with shamans just being a common part of everyday life, but then the series did very little with that. The power system was alright, and maybe could have been fleshed out into something more interesting, but it never got a chance to take it there, and the comedy, at least for me, just was not enjoyable. Really, through a lot of the early chapters, it felt like this manga was struggling with what it wanted to be. Moving on though to our last acts of the year, at least through September 2020, Time Paradox Ghostwriter. This is one that, at least in my sphere of AniTubers, got a lot of traction for an early manga. And I think that absolutely had to do with content creators resonating with the message of pleasing yourself versus pleasing the audience you want to reach. The artwork in this one is really, really great, and early on the story did hook me. But as it went on, it felt like the message got a little mixed in my taste, and it went from being 90% about manga, 10% about sci-fi, to 90% about sci-fi and 10% about manga, which I didn't really enjoy that flip. And I know in Japan it wasn't received well because the public didn't really like to have to root for a protagonist who was a plagiarist, so it kinda started off with one foot in the grave to begin with. But I will say, out of everything that debuted and was cancelled this year, Time Paradox Ghostwriter is the one where I would have been the most curious to see where it would have went. So that does it for the series that were axed, but there are still a few ongoing ones that I will be putting in this D category. The first is Hard-Boiled Cop and Dolphin. I've read all of what's out, which is not a ton, and it just doesn't feel like it's for me. It's absurd, but not really in a way I find enjoyable. At best, the comedy might get a light chuckle out of me, but most weeks I just kind of find it fairly forgettable. It's in D because it is still fairly unique, and if it's not axed, that means there is at least the potential it could get better. A Gravity Boys, on the other hand, yeah, it's probably not rising out of D for me. It's pretty much a crapshoot whether I'll find a chapter funny, which, with a gag manga, is a pretty good indicator the series isn't for you. Maybe there's some deeper message in it, but I'm not gonna be the one digging for it. Moving on, we are now at the C tier, and while that might still sound average, honestly, everything in this tier and above I would give a recommendation for. The stratification is more to prevent me from putting everything I like in B or above, because that's just how I be when it comes to rating things. This is also when the specific order for each individual tier becomes a little less standardized, as it's more in order just as I think of things to say for them. So screw it, let's start with some ecchi and Ayakashi Triangle, the heir apparent to Yuna and the Haunted Hot Springs, which was Jump's last fanservice heavy series that also ended in 2020, so I actually probably should have included it here, but I forgot to. It would have gone in the haven't read category, but still, I'll add it in for the link in the description if you want to make your own, because maybe you have read it. But yeah, Ayakashi Triangle is relatively new, but it's very enjoyable. The art is stellar, the plot is great, and the other plot might just be better. You're gonna have to judge for yourselves because I'm fairly certain I can't show most of it on YouTube. Next is Mission Yosakura Family. This is one I was very tempted to put in B, but I dropped down to C mostly because you don't always know what you can expect from it. Thus far, it's alternated from chapters being largely more comedic to the occasional very serious arc. And it's in those more serious arcs where the series' messages of love, family, and connection really shine through. I enjoy those more comedic chapters as well, but reading it week to week, it can be a tad bit frustrating to open a chapter and not really know what you're gonna get. That said, recently, Yosakura Family could be turning a corner with this problem, in which case, the sky's the limit for me. If the mangaka can learn to balance the more comedic and serious aspects of it, I could see myself ranking it as high as A. Magu-chan God of Destruction is another series that recently debuted. It's just a well-meaning, innocent comedy series. It's not the most complex, but it's not striving to be, and for what it is, I've really enjoyed it. A nice, quaint read, if you will. Alright, next, let's knock out two of the biggest successes of 2020 so far, Undead Unluck and Mashle, Muscles and Magic. They debuted an issue apart from each other, so they have virtually the same number of chapters, and they both are going in the B tier. Undead Unluck was admittedly a series that I was not very hot on. The first chapter kind of rubbed me the wrong way, as did the relationship between the two main characters. But I continued to give it a chance, and honestly it proved my first impressions wrong. The issues I had problems with took more and more of a backseat, and it's become one of the most creative battle shonen in recent memory. Coupled with an incredibly compelling power system that leads to some of the dopest panels in the manga, yeah, you should probably give Undead Unluck a read. It's no doubt only going to get better from here. Meanwhile, Mashle has me laughing my ass off with a one-note joke that has somehow not gotten old yet. That's helped by it evolving from more of a gag manga to a pseudo-battle shonen now, but I don't really care. It's simple, but it executes on that simplicity in a fantastic way. For me, it edges out Undead Unluck in terms of pure enjoyability, but you can't go wrong with either of these. Burn the Witch is an interesting one where there are only 4 chapters out, but they're all longer than normal, and we are getting more of it later, but for what we have, and coming from someone who's only read the first 100 chapters of Bleach so far, I'm on board. It's short enough that I don't really know if I have much more to say about it. Now on to Chainsaw Man. Fuck man, what can you even say? It's pure insanity, week after week. It feels like it could end in 5 chapters, or maybe this is just the prologue. Who really knows? It's got insanely creative paneling among its other strengths, and I think we're all just holding on for dear life right now. Let's just try to have fun with it, yeah? Jumping from devils to demons, I'm gonna put Kimetsu no Yaiba in C. Ultimately, I found it okay. The ending felt a bit drawn out, and I didn't really enjoy the last chapter all that much. Often when I think of shorter series in Shonen Jump, I think of bolder endings, things like Death Note or Assassination Classroom. Not to necessarily hold those series against Demon Slayer, it just ends up being a little more standard in my eyes, which is fine. And of course the success it's had is both tremendous and encouraging for the industry as a whole, and it'd be ignorant to not acknowledge that. The Promised Neverland is another one where I didn't terribly enjoy the ending, and even the last arc I wasn't too high on, but up until that point I did greatly enjoy the stories and characters. I'm not of the mind that the series started going downhill after Gracefield. Truthfully, I was 100% on board with it, basically until its time skip. After that point was when I think I started to cool on it, but even though that could have been handled better, I didn't hate it. It's for those reasons that I'm comfortable leaving it in B. Dr. Stone I've had an up and down relationship with. During some arcs, I've absolutely loved it, and I've never gotten tired of seeing Senku reinvent technology, but even in those arcs there can be chapters that feel like a drag or even a chore to read. I don't know, I can't quite put my finger on it, but I think part of it has to do with the amount of detail in Boichi's drawings. They're great, but I think with smaller panels they can really end up making the page feel cluttered. Add in some really wordy dialogue with those pages, and Dr. Stone is not a series that's on my #1 to read list for any week. It's still saved by its cast of charismatic characters, a strong art style overall, and a general sense of intrigue that is well done. But I don't want to put it any higher than C tier for right now, though out of almost everything on this list, Dr. Stone's position is the most malleable. And now we're finally getting to the top of the pack, and as you can see, we don't have that many to go. Let's not kid ourselves and get it right out of the way. My Hero Academia is going in A tier. It was my gateway into modern Shonen Jump and reading series weekly, so for that it will always have a special place in my heart. And it doesn't hurt that my love for it hasn't waned since I first watched and then read it. That is my personal bias, but I also think it's the consensus that the latest arc in My Hero Academia has been kind of insane in the best ways possible. Right now it's easily the series I look forward to most every week. Speaking of series in the middle of big, crazy arcs, Jujutsu Kaisen also goes in A. Detractors like to comment about its art style, but honestly, for how great the fight choreography in this manga is, it makes sense. Your eyes are not supposed to linger on every image and drink in the detail. It's boom, 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 boom. It's got a cast of great characters and a power system about as diverse and unique as you could want. Its anime is about to start airing. If you like it and can't get enough, I absolutely implore you to then read the manga. And then at last, we are brought to a quite somber end. I can't talk about Shonen Jump in 2020 without mentioning Actage, and I hate that even me talking about it comes with an asterisk. But for anyone unaware, Actage was unceremoniously cancelled in August after the disgusting human being that is the writer, who I will not dignify by naming, sexually assaulted 2 underage girls. The cancellation makes sense, I have no gripes with that. They even talked with the artist, who is a separate person, Shiro Usazaki, and made the decision to end it. But if I apply any amount of death of the author and take into account Shiro Usazaki's contributions as the artist, then I'm putting Actage in S. I completely understand if you don't agree. This is just me expressing how fond I was of this series. I truly had no problems with it. Usazaki's artwork is jaw-dropping sometimes, and Yonagi is still one of my favorite protagonists of all time. Night on the Galactic Railroad and Princess Ironfan are 2 of my favorite arcs of all time. Chiyoko and Yonagi's rivalry was something else. There is still a part of me that gets sad when I remember I'll never be able to see the end of this story. But at least for me, I refuse to let the actions of one awful human being taint my feelings about Actage. So fuck him, he does not get the final say on it. So that's kind of where I am with the series. I still love it even though I'm not talking about it as much publicly for obvious reasons. But hey, I value your opinion as well. Whether it's on Actage or any other series, you can leave it down below. As I said, a link to this tier list will be in the description. Tweet me yours at TazerLad on Twitter. I'm curious to see what you think. Also, crap, it's just now occurring to me that I forgot one series, Mori King, a gag manga that I have not read, so I guess no harm, no foul, but that really shows how much I didn't think about it. Thank you so much for watching though, and as always, an especially big thanks goes out to my awesome patrons, OverjoyedSoup, MVPino, Cardrose, and everyone else whose support helps make videos like these possible. Links to that Patreon if you'd like to join them, my shirts, and everything else are either down below or on the screen right now. Be sure to hit that like button and click that bell for notifications so you know whenever a new video goes up. You can also follow me on Twitter or Twitch. Thanks again for watching, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time.